The judge dismissed my testimony at the will reading, until I brought out the video confession. The air was thick with silence, heavy with anticipation, as the room filled up one by one with people dressed in well-tailored black. The law firm had converted an old brownstone in Beacon Hill into an upscale office, and its walnut-paneled conference room looked more like a dining salon on a yacht than a place to divide up a man's life. Marjorie Hayes sat near the back, hands folded neatly in her lap. 63 and recently retired after nearly 4 decades as a nurse, she looked calm, but not at ease. Her clothes were modest, a dark gray blouse, flat shoes, a knit cardigan despite the heat, but her eyes were alert, quietly scanning the faces around her. At the head of the long table sat Judge Theodore Murrow, brought out of retirement for special cases like this. He wore his experience like armor, slow to speak, slower to listen. Beside him, the sleek duo of estate attorneys, Cole Whitman and Elise Grant, whispered and shuffled papers, barely concealing their confidence. They represented the new beneficiaries: Evan, the business partner; Skylar, a yoga instructor no one in the family recognized; and a nebulous charity for entrepreneurial youth development run out of Miami. Marjorie hadn't seen her brother, Thomas, in the final 3 weeks of his life. She'd called, but was told he was too tired to talk. She'd shown up once, but was turned away by Evan with an apology too smooth to be sincere. Thomas had always been private, but never cold. Not to her. Now he was gone. Prostate cancer, they said. Fast decline, they said. And somehow, despite a history of saying he wanted his estate divided among family, including his niece Kayla, who had cared for him during chemo, the will had changed. Radically. Judge Murrow cleared his throat. We'll begin. The reading was matter-of-fact. The original will, drafted 5 years ago, was briefly acknowledged, then brushed aside. The judge explained that an addendum had been submitted and notarized on April 8, mere weeks before Thomas's death. Under the new terms, his entire estate, a house in Newton, 2 bank accounts, and partial ownership of a medical tech startup, would go to Evan, Skylar, and the youth charity. Kayla blinked hard but didn't say anything. She sat beside Marjorie, her jaw clenched. This is, someone began from the back, but Judge Murrow raised a hand. There will be time for comments after the formal reading. For now, please let the record proceed uninterrupted. Marjorie said nothing. She waited. The room absorbed the blow in a mix of confusion, discomfort, and a few victorious glances between Evan and Skylar. Elise Grant handed out copies of the amended will, her smile thin and professional. Then Judge Murrow looked up. Are there any formal objections to be entered into the record? Marjorie stood. Not abruptly, but with the kind of resolve that makes people turn and notice. I'd like to raise a concern, Your Honor, she said evenly. The room stilled. Murrow gave her a weary glance. State your name and relation to the deceased. Marjorie Hayes. I'm his sister. He nodded. Proceed. I believe the amendment to this will was made under duress, she said. Thomas wasn't of sound mind in those final weeks. He was isolated. I have reason to believe he didn't want this. Judge Murrow exhaled through his nose. That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence, Miss Hayes? I do, she said, his brows lifted, unconvinced. Let's not entertain speculation in a legal matter of this weight. If you have documentation, submit it to the court through counsel. Otherwise, we'll proceed. I'm not speculating, Marjorie replied, calm as ever. She reached into her handbag. The attorneys tensed. Evan shifted in his chair. She pulled out a small flash drive. This is a video, she said. Recorded on Thomas's old phone. It's time-stamped. Dated April 17th. Just 5 days before he passed. Now the silence in the room was different. Heavier. Expectant. Marjorie stepped forward, her palm open with the drive resting in it. On it, you'll hear Thomas say what really happened. Who visited. What he was told. And why he felt scared. Judge Murrow didn't move for a moment. His fingers tapped once against the desk. Is this admissible? Elise asked, her voice carefully neutral. Marjorie looked at her, then back at the judge. It's Thomas. Speaking clearly. Alone. No edits. The judge finally took the flash drive and handed it to the clerk. We'll verify the contents, he said. But if it's authentic, we'll reconvene. Marjorie returned to her seat. Kayla reached over and squeezed her hand. The attorneys whispered again. This time, they didn't look so composed, and for the first time since the reading began, Marjorie allowed herself to exhale. Justice, she knew, didn't always roar. Sometimes it entered the room quietly, and waited for the right moment to press play. The judge dismissed my testimony at the will reading, until I brought out the video confession. The law firm's tech specialist, a young man in a button-down shirt with frayed cuffs, hovered over the conference room's media station. He inserted the flash drive as if it might explode. The flat screen on the wall blinked to life, blue and sterile, casting a faint glow across the silent room. Judge Murrow shifted in his chair. "Proceed," he said curtly. Marjorie didn't look at the screen. She stared ahead, hands clasped, her breathing measured. She had watched the video 5 times. That was enough. The image appeared, Thomas, seated on the side of his bed, his face gaunt, skin pale, voice thin but steady. He was wearing an old Celtics t-shirt and a knit beanie Marjorie had given him last Christmas. The walls behind him were bare, no family photos, no signs of life, just the kind of sterile order that suggested someone had been cleaning out the place slowly, carefully. "Okay," he said on the video, glancing briefly at the phone before settling his eyes on the lens. "It's Sunday, April 17th. I'm making this so there's a record, just in case." Evan looked down, jaw twitching. Skylar shifted in her seat, arms crossed tight. Thomas cleared his throat on screen. "I'm not drunk. Not medicated. I haven't taken anything today, except the steroids for the inflammation." He paused. "If you're watching this, something's gone wrong." "No one breathed, they told me. Evan told me I needed to update the will. Said the startup was mine in name only, that if I didn't clean things up, the business would fold." Skylar started visiting with him. "They said they'd take care of me, keep me out of hospice, give me control over my own death. That I'd die with dignity. But they wouldn't help unless I signed." The room went still, like the oxygen had been sucked out. Thomas looked away from the camera briefly. "I didn't want to. I stalled. Then they brought in a notary, said it was just a formality. I didn't even get to review what they changed." Elise Grant leaned toward Evan and whispered sharply, "Did you know about this?" His face had gone pale. "I was tired," Thomas continued. "I didn't want to fight anymore. I didn't think anyone would care. But I see now. I should have told someone. Told Marjorie. Or Kayla. I'm sorry." He looked back at the screen, and this time his expression shifted, the calmness breaking into visible pain. "If you can undo this, if this helps, do it." The screen went blacked out. A moment passed, then another. Judge Murrow sat back slowly, his jaw clenched. The clerk scribbled furiously beside him. "I want to see the metadata," Elise said, her voice trembling with practiced restraint. "This could be fabricated. Deepfakes, manipulated timestamps, it's real," Marjorie interrupted. Calm, unshaken. "The phone belonged to Thomas. It's still at my house. Unlocked. You can match the file to the internal storage." Murrow raised a hand. "We'll have a forensic analyst verify the video's authenticity. Until then, this will is provisionally suspended pending investigation." Elise protested again, but the judge was already turning to the clerk. "Issue a temporary hold on all asset transfers and notify the probate court. We reconvene in 3 days." Kayla let out a quiet breath beside Marjorie, then leaned in. "You really had it this whole time," she whispered. Marjorie nodded once. "I needed to wait until they thought they'd won." Across the table, Evan was already on his phone. His hands shook slightly. Skylar stood and made for the door. "This is bullshit," she muttered under her breath. He didn't know what he was saying. He was dying. Marjorie turned to face her. "Exactly. And you used that to your advantage." Skylar stopped in her tracks but didn't respond. She left the room without looking back. The conference room emptied gradually, leaving only the hum of electronics and the fading echo of what had just been revealed. Judge Murrow paused on his way out. He looked at Marjorie for the first time with something like respect. "You came prepared," he said. Marjorie looked up. "I came with the truth." Later that evening, back at her modest 2-bedroom home in Watertown, Marjorie sat in the quiet glow of the kitchen. A mug of chamomile tea sat untouched in front of her. She stared at Thomas's phone on the table, scratched screen, familiar green case, the wallpaper still a photo of the two of them from a Red Sox game 10 years ago. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired. Her brother had been used, manipulated, in his weakest days. And while the world outside saw a composed woman who'd turned the tables, only she knew the price of carrying this kind of silence for so long. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kayla. "Thank you for not giving up." Marjorie typed back slowly, "It's not over." She stared at the screen a moment, then locked it, because she was right. It wasn't. The video had opened the door, but the fight to protect her brother's legacy had just begun. "The judge dismissed my testimony at the will reading, until I brought out the video confession 2 days later." Marjorie sat on the worn bench outside the probate court's south wing, her fingers wrapped tightly around a manila envelope. Inside it were 3 neatly organized sets of documents: Thomas's medical records, text exchanges from the last year, and a copy of the official police report she'd filed after he passed, the one no one had paid attention to until now. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:27 a.m. The hearing would begin in 3 minutes. Kayla, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big and her hair in a tight ponytail, stood beside the water cooler, scrolling through her phone with nervous fingers. Marjorie had always admired her niece's resilience. Kayla had dropped out of college to care for Thomas when his illness advanced, but the stress of this legal battle was starting to show. She's late, Kayla said. Elise Grant. Won't be late, Marjorie replied. She'll walk in just on time. They always do. Right on cue, the opposing team arrived. Elise Grant, sharp in a slate blue pantsuit, led the way, followed by Cole Whitman and Evan, dressed not in his usual slick business casual, but a charcoal suit and burgundy tie. He looked the part of a grieving friend, but his eyes betrayed the performance. No sign of Skylar. They didn't exchange greetings. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors, and everyone filed in. Judge Murrow, in black robes this time, entered with the slow gravity of someone who knew every eye was watching. The court is now in session, the clerk announced. Once seated, Elise was the first to speak. She didn't waste time, Your Honor. The defense has reviewed the video submitted by Ms. Hayes. While we do not contest that Mr. Hayes appears in the footage, we strongly challenge its context and credibility. We have brought character evidence. To that end. Proceed, the judge said. Elise stepped aside as Evan took the stand. Marjorie watched him walk, noting how he moved slower, more carefully than usual, as if to broadcast somberness. He was sworn in, then began. Thomas was like a brother to me, he said. We started our company together in 2011. I was there when he got his diagnosis. I helped him set up home care when he refused hospice. I visited every day. I made sure his bills were paid. Elise nodded approvingly. Did you ever see any indication that he was not of sound mind? Evan shook his head. Never. He was lucid. Weak, sure. But clear. We talked business all the way until the end. Were you present when the new will was signed? I was. Along with a notary and Skylar. Thomas had concerns about how his assets would be used. He told me he didn't want family squabbling. That's why he redirected everything. Did he mention Marjorie? Evan hesitated, then offered a soft, sympathetic look, the kind reserved for damage control. He was grateful for her. But he said they hadn't been close in recent years. That she had a strong personality, sometimes controlling. He didn't want that around him at the end. Marjorie didn't flinch. But Kayla, beside her, bristled. Elise moved in for the final blow. So in your experience, there was no pressure. No coercion. Just a sick man making thoughtful decisions in his final days? Exactly. Elise turned to the judge. The defense would also like to submit a psychological evaluation conducted on Thomas 2 weeks before the amendment. Signed by a licensed therapist, confirming cognitive clarity. Judge Murrow raised an eyebrow. Why was this not provided in the initial filing? It was deemed unnecessary. But in light of the new evidence, we felt it appropriate. The judge motioned for the clerk to collect the document. Now it was Marjorie's turn. Her attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Renata Feld, guided her to the stand. Kayla gave her hand a squeeze as she passed. Marjorie was sworn in, then took a long breath before speaking. Thomas was my younger brother. I changed his diapers. I taught him to ride a bike. I sat beside him in the ER the night he broke his arm at 14. We weren't distant, we spoke twice a week. Until Evan took over his care. Renata nodded. When did you begin to suspect something was wrong? When my calls stopped being returned. When I was told by Evan that Thomas was too tired to talk, repeatedly. When Kayla was turned away from the house. And most of all, when Thomas's phone ended up in my mailbox the day after he died. The room shifted slightly. Even Elise leaned forward. You said you received his phone? Yes. In a padded envelope. No note. Just his phone, unlocked. He had never mailed me anything in his life. Is that how you found the video? It was saved in a folder called Last Things. There were also drafts of emails to Kayla. Never sent. All said the same thing, that he didn't want to go through with the changes. That he felt trapped. Evan leaned in and whispered harshly to Elise. She didn't respond. Do you have a copy of those emails? I've submitted them to the court. Renata nodded. In your view, did Thomas sound mentally unwell in the video? No, Marjorie said. He sounded exhausted. But clear. Clearer than I've heard him in weeks. That's why I brought it here. Renata paused, then asked gently, why did you wait to reveal it? Marjorie looked at the judge, then at Evan. Because I knew the moment I did, they'd try to make me the villain. A hush settled. The judge made a small note in his ledger. Then addressed both sides. The court will review the new material submitted. Both parties will be notified within 72 hours regarding whether this matter will move to full probate litigation or be resolved by motion. Bang of the gavel. Session adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Evan moved toward Marjorie, hands in his pockets. You should have left it alone, he said quietly. She didn't blink. So should you. He smiled faintly. You think a video changes everything? Marjorie stepped closer. No. But I think the truth, given time, always does. Kayla joined her. Evan turned and walked away without another word. They stood in silence as the crowd dispersed. You think we're gonna win? Kayla asked. Marjorie didn't answer immediately. She looked up at the sky, blue and high and empty. We're not here to win, she said finally. We're here to make sure he didn't die unheard. And somewhere deep inside her, she felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't felt since Thomas passed to conviction. The judge dismissed my testimony at the will reading, until I brought out the video confession the morning after the hearing. Marjorie awoke to the sound of her landline ringing, a noise so rare it felt almost surreal. She hadn't answered it in weeks, not since Thomas died. Most people who knew her used her cell. She rubbed her eyes, glanced at the clock, 6:42 a.m., and picked up the receiver. Hello? The voice on the other end was hesitant, gravelly, like someone who hadn't spoken at length in a while. Marjorie? This is Alan Brewster. I used to work with Thomas. She sat up straighter. The name was vaguely familiar, not from family barbecues or holidays, but from Thomas's old stories. Alan had been his first co-founder in the early days of the biotech startup, before Evan. I remember, she said cautiously. You left the company years ago. I didn't leave, Alan replied. I was pushed out. Quietly. When Evan came in. Marjorie blinked. Why are you calling me now? There was a long pause. Then, because I heard what happened at the will reading. And I have something you might want to see. He offered to meet that afternoon. He didn't want to send anything digitally, too risky, he said, and insisted on a face-to-face conversation. That same afternoon, Marjorie and Kayla pulled up outside a small bungalow in Quincy. The lawn was uneven and the porch slanted slightly, but the American flag near the door was crisp and the welcome mat looked scrubbed clean. Alan Brewster answered the door in jeans and a faded MIT hoodie. His face was weathered, his hair nearly white. He had a limp and wore thick glasses, but his handshake was firm. Inside, the house was filled with books, framed patents, and yellowed photographs of lab teams from the early 2000s. You want tea? He asked. Marjorie declined. Kayla accepted. Alan led them into a small study lined with filing cabinets and old tech gear. From a locked drawer, he pulled out a thin manila folder and set it on the desk. This is from 2015, he said. A non-compete agreement Evan drafted when I was forced out. At the time, I thought it was just a legal shield. But what I didn't know, until years later, was that he was already restructuring ownership in secret. Thomas had no idea. He thought the equity was being redistributed to keep the company afloat. He slid over a second document, an internal email chain. Printed out. Kayla leaned in, reading aloud. Thomas will sign anything if we spin it as strategic. Her voice caught. Jesus. Alan nodded grimly. That's Evan's language. He always saw Thomas as a scientist, not a businessman. Said he needed guidance. But the truth is, he groomed him, slowly cut him off from people who asked questions. Marjorie exhaled. He isolated him. Yes. And not just from you. From the early partners. From his old doctor. Even from me. He tapped the folder again. I held on to this because I always had a bad feeling. But I didn't come forward until now because, honestly, I didn't think it would matter. People like Evan always land on their feet. Marjorie reached for the folder. You're willing to submit this? Alan nodded. I already emailed your lawyer. I just wanted you to know it's real. And I'm willing to testify. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Just looked down at the pages, the lines of quiet betrayal. She thought of Thomas, all the times he'd defended Evan, even against her. He saved the company, Thomas used to say. You just don't see how things work in business. But now she understood. Thomas had been trusting, not naive. And Evan had known exactly how far that trust could stretch before it snapped. As they left the house, Kayla kept glancing over at Marjorie. You okay? No, she said truthfully. But I feel steadier. Back home, Marjorie handed the documents over to Renata, who immediately contacted the court to file a motion for early discovery. This shifts things, Renata said. A third-party witness with first-hand knowledge of financial manipulation? If Brewster's willing to testify under oath, we can build a case for a full-scale investigation into fraud. But with every step forward, the pushback intensified. That evening, Kayla received a message request on Instagram. A private account. No followers. Just one message. Your aunt's going to get you both buried in legal fees. Then another, seconds later, hope the house is worth it. Kayla showed it to Marjorie. This is Evan, she said. Or someone close to him. Marjorie stared at the messages, then shook her head. They want us scared. Because they're running out of control. She opened her laptop and began typing, this time, not just emails to her lawyer, but a draft statement. They want quiet, she said. Let's give them the opposite. The next morning, a small op-ed appeared on the Boston Globe's online edition, submitted by Marjorie Hayes. In calm, measured prose, she described how the last months of her brother's life had been twisted, how legal mechanisms can be used to silence the vulnerable, and how too many families suffer in silence when greed. Where's the mask of professionalism? She didn't name Evan. She didn't have to. By noon, it was trending, and by evening, an anonymous email was sent to Marjorie's lawyer with a subject line that read simply, "You're not the only one who recorded something." The body of the email contained no text, just a download link. The judge dismissed my testimony at the will reading, until I brought out the video confession. The email sat in Renata Feld's inbox like a loaded weapon. She didn't click the download link right away. Instead, she forwarded it to her firm's cybersecurity analyst and scheduled a call with Marjorie that same night. "You didn't open it, right?" she asked over speakerphone, voice clipped by caution. "No," Marjorie replied. "But it's real. I can feel it." Renata sighed. "It might be. But anonymous attachments are risky. Let us vet it first." The next morning, after careful examination, the firm confirmed the file was clean, a 5-minute video clip, recorded on a nanny cam or security camera, angled slightly upward, with grainy audio and time-stamped exactly 2 weeks before Thomas's death. What it showed wasn't Thomas. It was Evan. In Thomas's study. And he wasn't alone. The video opened with Evan pacing, phone pressed to his ear. No, she's still calling. The sister. I've got it under control." A pause. "Look, we just need him to sign the final version. I already buried the other draft. She's going to ask questions, they always do." A second voice entered, off-screen but close. "What about the nurse? The niece? Kayla? She's emotional. She's not the problem. Marjorie is. You should see the way she watches me. Like she knows." The voice scoffed. "Then let her know. She's not on the will anymore. Let her try to prove anything." Evan lowered his voice. "That's what I'm doing. I've locked down everything. The account changes went through, the notary's been handled, and if he tries to back out, we'll say he was confused. Who's going to contradict a cancer patient's final wish?" The video ended there. Renata played it for Marjorie and Kayla. In her office that afternoon. The silence afterward was electric. Kayla was the first to speak. "That son of a bitch." Marjorie said nothing at first. She just looked at the paused image. Evan, frozen mid-stride, face hard and calculating. "The picture of control," he said. "The notary's been handled," she murmured. Renata nodded. "That could be huge. If the notary was compromised, then the amendment's tainted," Marjorie finished. "Illegally executed." Renata leaned forward. "Here's the thing. We still don't know who sent this. The camera angle looks like a home-installed system. Possibly one Thomas forgot about, or maybe Evan didn't realize it was still running." Kayla's eyes widened. "That's why Thomas mailed me the phone. He couldn't say it directly, but he was trying to point us somewhere." Marjorie nodded slowly. "And someone else knew." Renata tapped a pen against her notepad. "This changes everything. With both recordings, the confession and this, we have corroboration. Not just that Thomas was pressured, but that Evan knew what he was doing was wrong. We move forward. Fast." That afternoon, she filed a motion to enter the second recording into evidence and submitted an affidavit requesting an emergency hearing. 3 days later, they were back in court. The courtroom buzzed with energy, the press present this time, whispering behind notebooks and phone cameras. Judge Murrow looked more alert than usual. His gaze moved sharply between the parties, his patience thinned by the mounting spectacle. Renata rose first. "Your Honor, we have submitted a second video recording. This time, of Mr. Evan Rourke, speaking openly about his intent to isolate Mr. Hayes and manipulate the terms of his estate." Elise Grant didn't rise. She just sat still, mouth slightly parted, her posture rigid. The judge nodded. "I have reviewed the file. Mr. Rourke, do you wish to respond?" Evan stood, not as confidently as before. "The video was taken without my knowledge, Your Honor. I have no comment on its authenticity until I've had time to review the full context." Judge Murrow narrowed his eyes. "Are you disputing that it's your voice?" Evan hesitated. "I'm not confirming anything without my attorney's advice." Marjorie watched him closely. His hands were balled into fists behind his back, a small tell. He was unraveling. The judge turned to Elise. "Ms. Grant?" She stood slowly. "Given the developments, I respectfully request a continuance. Our team needs time to investigate the origin of this recording." "Granted. But let me be clear," the judge said, voice tightening. "If this footage is verified, and initial analysis suggests it is authentic, then we are no longer in the realm of civil dispute. We are discussing fraud, coercion, and possibly criminal conduct. This court takes that very seriously." The next week would be crucial. Back at home, Marjorie sat in her living room as Kayla updated their growing list of supporters. The Globe article had sparked conversations online, and now, with rumors of a second recording, legal interest in the case was intensifying. Former employees of Evan's startup were reaching out. One anonymously offered to provide emails showing backdated financial decisions. A former caregiver of Thomas even called, saying she'd noticed people coming and going at odd hours. In his final weeks, the pieces were shifting fast, but one mystery remained: who had recorded that second video, and why had they waited until now to send it? That night, another anonymous email arrived. This one contained a single sentence: "He wasn't alone in doing this. But I couldn't stop him then. I'm trying now." No name. No attachments, just the suggestion that someone inside the betrayal wanted to undo it, quietly, from the shadows. The judge dismissed my testimony at the will reading, until I brought out the video confession. The knock came just before sunset, 2 quick taps on Marjorie's front door, then silence. She wasn't expecting anyone. Kayla was at the co-op, picking up groceries, and Renata had just emailed to confirm the next court date. Marjorie peeked through the side window, heart thudding, her body still attuned to the wariness that had grown over the past week. On the porch stood a man in his early 30s, tall, slim, wearing a Red Sox cap low over his face. In his hands, a brown leather messenger bag. She opened the door but kept the screen locked. "Yes." He removed his cap. "Miss Hayes? I'm Adam. I used to work for Evan Rourke." Marjorie blinked. "Doing what?" "IT," he said. "Security. Systems. Device integration. I set up the nanny cam that caught that second video." He hesitated. It was meant for Thomas, not for Evan. But the camera backed up to cloud storage Evan never deleted. "I saw the footage by accident, after Thomas died." She opened the screen door. "Come in." He stepped inside nervously, wiping his feet. "Twice. I didn't know what to do. I thought about deleting it. But then your article came out, and I realized I'd been part of something I didn't understand at the time." Marjorie gestured to the couch. "Sit. Tell me everything." Adam took a breath, then launched in. "Evan hired me in early 2021. I worked under contract to set up smart home infrastructure in Thomas's house. Security, automated lights, voice command. He said Thomas was too sick to manage things himself. I believed him. I had no reason not to." He opened his bag and pulled out a tablet. On it were folders labeled with dates and device names. One was titled Steadicam 04.10.2022. "I was supposed to disable the backups once the system was installed, but I forgot to turn off remote syncing on one device, the study camera. When Thomas died, I checked the archive, expecting nothing. Instead, I found conversations between Evan and others, some with Skylar, some with people I didn't recognize." He didn't know the Steadicam had a wide-angle lens. He paused, opened the folder, and tapped play. This time, it was a different clip, one Marjorie hadn't seen. Evan was sitting at Thomas's desk with a man in a blazer and sunglasses. They spoke in hushed tones, but the mic caught the conversation. "I want it notarized by next Thursday," Evan said. The other man replied, "That's tight. If he's not alert, it won't pass." "He'll be alert. Or we'll say he was." Evan sipped from a glass. "You'll be compensated." The man nodded. 10 grand. Clean and off books." Adam froze the video. "That guy is Michael Rigo. He's not a real notary. He's a freelancer who fakes medical paperwork for custody cases. I googled him last night. He's been sued twice but never prosecuted." Marjorie stared at the paused screen. "He's the one who notarized the will amendment?" Adam nodded. "The signature matches." Kayla had just returned and stood silently behind them, mouth slightly open. "Does this video have a timestamp?" she asked. "April 4th, 10:38 p.m. "For days before the will was updated." Marjorie stood. Her body was buzzing with cold fury. Not rage, not panic, but the sort of clarity that comes when truth finally settles into shape. "Can you give this to our lawyer?" "I already have," Adam said. "I emailed her this morning. She asked me to come speak with you directly." That night, Renata filed an emergency motion to invalidate the April 8 amendment on the basis of fraud, coercion, and use of a falsified notary. She also issued a formal request to depose Michael Rigo and subpoena his financials for evidence of under-the-table payments, but the impact wasn't just legal. The morning after the motion was filed, Elise Grant requested a private meeting with Judge Murrow, off the record. An hour later, her resignation from Evan's legal team was submitted in writing. In her brief public statement, she cited ethical conflict of interest and newly discovered information that compels me to step away. It made headlines. That evening, Evan's replacement attorney, a corporate defense specialist with a reputation for dragging cases into oblivion, filed a countersuit. Defamation, emotional distress, and unlawful surveillance. Marjorie read the motion and didn't flinch. She expected it. What's the strategy here? Kayla asked as they read over the document together. Delay. Overwhelm us. Make us look like we're grasping at revenge, Marjorie replied. But it's not going to work. He doesn't understand something. What? We're not afraid of the long fight. 2 days later, Adam testified before the court. In a preliminary session, he walked the judge through the footage, his credentials, and the timeline. Calm, detailed, unshaken, the courtroom was silent as Judge Murrow reviewed the video a second time. Then he looked up. This court finds sufficient cause to suspend the April 8 will amendment pending full evidentiary hearing, he said. Effective immediately, the estate of Thomas Hayes reverts to its previous designation under the 2017 will. He banged the gavel. For the first time, Marjorie allowed herself to smile, just faintly, but as they exited the courtroom, Renata warned, "This isn't the end. Evan won't stop here." Marjorie nodded. "Let him come. Now we have more than the truth. We have people who aren't afraid to speak." That night, a final anonymous email arrived. This one had no files, only a message. "He's desperate. And desperate people make dangerous moves. Be ready." Marjorie stared at the screen. Danger wasn't new to her. She'd spent a lifetime tending to others in their worst moments, patients in pain, families in crisis, her brother wasting away under the weight of silent manipulation, but now, the crisis was hers. And she wasn't afraid of it anymore. The judge dismissed my testimony at the will reading, until I brought out the video confession. The first threat came as a note. Handwritten. No return address. Left inside Marjorie's mailbox, not mailed, but placed there. Walk away. You got your moment. Don't dig deeper. The second was more direct. A slashed tire. Her car, parked just 2 feet from her front steps, had been vandalized during the night. No other vehicles on the street were touched. Marjorie stood on the curb the next morning, arms crossed, watching as a tow truck lifted the car off the pavement. Kayla paced nearby, phone in hand, documenting everything. "We have to file a report," Kayla said. "This isn't just intimidation. It's escalation." Marjorie nodded. "File it. Then call Renata. He's panicking." She didn't say Evan's name. She didn't need to. At the courthouse later that day, the motion to proceed with formal fraud charges against Evan was scheduled. Renata, sharp and deliberate as ever, brought Adam's full testimony, both video recordings, and Alan Brewster's affidavit regarding the manipulation of Thomas's business interests. Meanwhile, Evan appeared for the first time without a full legal entourage. Just him and his new attorney, a quiet man named Cardin with a reputation for brutal litigation tactics and zero courtroom charm. Renata leaned over to Marjorie as they waited for the judge. "He'll try to paint you as unstable," she whispered. "He's going to turn this from facts into emotion, accuse you of obsession, vengeance, manipulation." Marjorie didn't blink. "He's welcome to try." The hearing began. Evan's attorney requested that Marjorie and Kayla be barred from speaking publicly about the case during litigation, citing a pattern of inflammatory behavior and intentional character damage. Renata countered immediately. "My client has exercised her right to speak out about elder abuse and inheritance fraud, both legitimate public concerns. Nothing she said has been inaccurate or misleading." Judge Murrow, tired but focused, denied the request. "This court has seen no evidence of misconduct by Ms. Hayes. The motion is denied." Evan barely concealed his reaction, a sharp exhale and a clenched jaw. Outside the courthouse, as Marjorie and Kayla walked toward the parking garage, a man stepped from behind a concrete column. Mid-30s. Broad shoulders. Black hoodie. He didn't speak. Just stood in their path for a moment too long. Kayla instinctively stepped between him and her aunt. "Can we help you?" He glanced at Marjorie, then turned and walked away. No confrontation. No words, just presence. It was enough. They went straight to the precinct. This time, the police didn't shrug them off. The mounting paper trail, the video footage, the online threats, the tire, now this, painted a clear picture. They opened an official investigation. That evening, Renata called with an update. "We've just been served," she said, her voice calm but grim. "Evan's team filed for emergency conservatorship over Thomas's estate. They're claiming you're interfering with distribution, acting irrationally, and potentially jeopardizing estate assets." Marjorie laughed, a short, cold sound. "They're accusing me of the same tactics he used." "Yes," Renata said. "Because when they start to lose, they copy the fight." Marjorie sat back, letting the weight of it settle. "Can we beat this?" "Yes," Renata replied. "But we need something more. One piece that shows direct financial gain, a paper trail, an email, a transaction. Something that connects Evan's manipulation to personal profit." I might have it, came a voice from the hallway. It was Kayla, holding her laptop. I've been going through Thomas's email drafts on the old phone. I think I found something. She turned the screen toward them. A half-written email from Thomas to his accountant. Saved 2 days before he died. Evan said the new terms would make sure he got control of the startup shares, but I don't see anything about that in the draft. He said not to worry, that it was just structured through the youth charity so it wouldn't raise flags. I'm not sure what he means. Attached was a spreadsheet Thomas had started, basic, messy, but it listed names, percentages. And under one column, Skylar, 10% charity, Rourke Youth Futures, 65% Evan, via trust, 25% Renata set up straighter. This is it. Can we tie that charity to him? I already did, Kayla said. It's registered in Florida. The board is 3 people. One is Evan. Another is his cousin. The third is a shell. Marjorie looked between them, her pulse rising, but this time with purpose, not fear. They had him. 2 nights later, Marjorie's front window was smashed. A brick through the glass, no note this time, just rage. Raw and clumsy, but she didn't flinch. She filed the report, replaced the glass, and scheduled a press interview the next morning. In the studio, under warm lights and facing a seasoned reporter, she sat tall. I'm not doing this for money, she said. I'm doing this because my brother asked me to, in the only way he could, by leaving behind the truth. It's my job to carry it forward. By the time the segment aired, the court's inbox was flooded with letters of support, and Renata had filed a petition to have the entire estate formally re-examined under allegations of criminal fraud. As the walls closed in, Evan made one last move. He vanished. Failed to show at his next legal deposition. His phone went dark. Office shuttered. Charity website pulled offline. The hunt had begun. The judge dismissed my testimony at the will reading, until I brought out the video confession. When Evan Rourke failed to appear for his scheduled deposition, it didn't take long for the news to spread. 1 missed appearance might have been dismissed as a stall tactic. 2, paired with a disabled phone, disconnected office lines, and a temporarily unavailable notice on his LinkedIn, made it clear. He was gone. The court issued a bench warrant. Local and federal authorities were notified. Renata filed a motion to freeze any remaining assets tied to the estate and requested access to the financial accounts associated with Rourke Youth Futures, the shell charity Evan had used to redirect Thomas's inheritance. But even as the legal machinery kicked into gear, Marjorie felt no relief. Only a gnawing hollowness. She had been fighting for clarity, for resolution. Not disappearance. Evan's absence didn't feel like closure. It felt like unfinished business, and worse, like something still alive, just out of reach. 4 days later, a knock came at her door. Kayla answered. A woman stood on the porch in business attire, holding a leather case. Mid-40s. Blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. I'm with the Massachusetts Office of the Attorney General, she said. Mara Dunn. May I speak with Ms. Hayes? Marjorie joined her at the door. Dunn showed her ID and stepped inside. We've opened a fraud investigation into Rourke Youth Futures and Evan Rourke personally, she said. But here's the issue, we can't find him. And we're now getting word that he may be attempting to move funds internationally. Marjorie's brow furrowed. How? The accounts were frozen. Some, Dunn said. But not all. The charity had ties to 2 limited liability corporations in Florida and Nevada. And at least 1 crypto wallet. Kayla swore under her breath. He's slipping through the cracks. Which is why I'm here, Dunn said, looking directly at Marjorie. We need to know everything. Every detail. Even if it feels irrelevant. They spent 2 hours going through documents, emails, call logs, anything that might hint at a plan, a safe house, a fallback contact. It wasn't until Kayla opened a rarely used drawer in Thomas's old desk, a drawer she had emptied before, but never closely examined, that she found a small, spiral-bound notepad, tucked in the back, a page with a name scribbled in barely legible ink, Brent G., Palm Springs. Vegas option if things sour. Call if Evan pushes. They scanned it and handed it to Dunn. Within hours, agents were coordinating with California authorities, and 48 hours after that, Evan was spotted at a private airfield outside Palm Springs, attempting to board a flight under the name Eric G. Randall. The arrest was quiet, no cameras, no headlines, no resistance, but when the call came through to Marjorie, she sat in stunned silence. He's in custody, Dunn said on speakerphone. He had 2 fake passports, a suitcase full of burner phones, and a private ledger tracking cryptocurrency transfers tied to the shell charity. He wasn't just running, he was laundering. Marjorie closed her eyes. Thank you. Dunn paused. We couldn't have done this without your persistence. You're going to help a lot of people by blowing this open. We're already identifying other victims from previous fraud schemes. After the call ended, Kayla sat across from her at the kitchen table. You should feel something, she said. Relieved. Proud. Anything. I do, Marjorie replied. But I don't think it's over yet. Why? Because it never really is. We still have court. His lawyers. There'll be appeals, delays, all of it. And even when that ends, Thomas doesn't come back. Kayla nodded quietly. No. But his story got told. That night, Marjorie walked into Thomas's old room. The walls were still bare. The bed still made. The window open to the warm summer breeze. She sat at his desk and opened the drawer again. There was nothing left in it. But she stared at it for a long time anyway. In the silence, she heard his voice again, not from a recording, not from a screen, but from memory. If you can undo this, do it. 1 week later, the headlines broke: startup co-founder arrested in multi-state inheritance fraud scheme. Charity front used to mask elder coercion. Retired nurses. Testimony sparks major financial investigation. Elise Grant, now fully dissociated from the case, issued a statement of regret, and the court scheduled the final hearing to reinstate Thomas's original will, the one that split his estate between family and friends. The one he'd drawn up when he was still healthy, lucid, and unafraid. Marjorie, for the first time in months, stood on her front steps and looked out at her neighborhood not as a battleground, but as home. Kayla joined her. Do you think people change? Kayla asked. Marjorie thought for a long moment. Some do. Some hide what they are until it's too late. And us? We don't change. We endure. The judge dismissed my testimony at the will reading, until I brought out the video confession. The courtroom was quieter this time. No reporters. No press cameras. Just the hum of ceiling fans and the rustle of legal pads as attorneys arranged their folders. The battle had already been fought. Now came the reckoning. At the front, Judge Murrow reviewed a thick binder of final documents. The lines on his face looked deeper, but his movements were brisk, precise. His reputation for impartiality had weathered scrutiny throughout the case, and he now carried the air of a man ready to close a chapter that had become larger than anyone expected. Marjorie sat beside Renata in the first row, dressed in navy blue with her hands clasped. Kayla, hair down for the first time in weeks, was behind them, flanked by two of Thomas's old colleagues who had quietly returned to support the family after Evan's arrest. The defense table was nearly empty. Evan, still in custody, was appearing via secure video link from a federal holding facility in Arizona. His new attorney, Mr. Cardin, sat stiffly with no notes in front of him, just the obligation of representation. No arguments. No defiance. The case had collapsed under its own weight. Judge Murrow cleared his throat. This court is convened to render a final decision regarding the estate of Thomas Hayes, based on the overwhelming evidence of fraud, coercion, and illegal interference. In the amendment dated April 8, the court formally invalidates said amendment and restores the original 2017 will as the sole governing document. He paused, letting the words settle into the room like soft thunder. The estate shall be distributed as previously intended, equal shares to Ms. Marjorie Hayes and Ms. Kayla Hayes, with remaining portions designated for Thomas's former colleagues. At Apex Biotech as outlined in the supplemental letter attached to the 2017 will. A quiet intake of breath echoed behind Marjorie. She didn't turn. She simply stared ahead, eyes dry. Furthermore, Murrow continued, the court will recommend to the district attorney's office that a criminal referral proceed regarding Mr. Evan Rourke's actions, as well as the operation of the so-called Rourke Youth Futures Foundation. Additional charges may follow under federal jurisdiction. The gavel fell. A small sound. The echo of a long war's end. Outside, the sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. Marjorie stood still as Kayla hugged her, pressing her face into her shoulder. You did it, Kayla whispered. No, Marjorie said gently. We did it. Renata joined them, arms crossed but smiling. I've never seen a fraud case unravel so fast once the first thread was pulled. What happens now? Kayla asked. Asset recovery, Renata replied. Probate execution. Evan's criminal trial is out of our hands, the state will handle that. Marjorie nodded. And the house? It's yours, Renata said. Thomas's name has already been removed from the deed. The paperwork will be finalized this week. Marjorie looked across the plaza. She didn't feel victorious. She felt still. For the first time in months, the internal spinning had quieted. But it wasn't joy that filled her, it was something simpler, peace. That weekend, she and Kayla returned to Thomas's home. It was the first time Marjorie had stepped through the door since his death without bracing herself. The living room still smelled faintly of cedar and disinfectant. The furniture had been untouched. It was as if the house had waited, frozen in limbo until the right people walked back in. They moved slowly through each room, dusting, boxing things up with care. Old photos. Medical journals. Scribbled notes on notepads that no longer made sense but still carried the shape of his handwriting. In the upstairs bedroom, Kayla opened the closet to find a flannel shirt she used to wear when Thomas was in chemo. One he'd always insisted she keep warm in, even if she didn't need it. She held it for a long moment, then folded it neatly and placed it in a keep box. In the study, Marjorie opened a drawer to find one last envelope. Sealed. Her name on it. She sat down and unfolded the letter with careful fingers. Marjorie, if you're reading this, then I didn't get to say goodbye. I'm sorry for how things went. For not fighting harder, for letting people in who didn't deserve it. I hope you never think I doubted you. I knew you'd protect what mattered, even when I couldn't see clearly anymore. There's a reason I left the phone where I did. I knew you'd find what I couldn't say. You always did. You always took care of me, even when I didn't want it. I hope one day you'll sit on the porch again. Drink something hot. Feel like you can breathe. Thank you for being my sister. I miss you already. Love, Thomas. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. She folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then stood and looked out the study window, where golden light pooled across the lawn. She could breathe now. Not all the way, not yet, but enough. The story made its final rounds in the media that week. Quietly. Factually. The scandal had moved on to other headlines, other villains. But for those who paid attention, the moral was clear. The truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it lives in the hands of a quiet woman who refuses to walk away. The porch had always been a quiet place. Wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table, shaded by the overhang of Thomas's modest colonial-style home in Newton. It faced west, which meant the light slanted low and golden in the late afternoons. The hour when the air turned still and the neighborhood exhaled. Marjorie sat there now, a cup of black tea in one hand, Thomas's letter folded in her lap. The house was officially hers. Probate was settled. The legal haze that had hung over her brother's memory for months had finally lifted. There were no reporters, no hearings, no incoming calls from the Attorney General's office. Just the soft hum of sprinklers from the neighbor's yard and the faint buzz of cicadas. Kayla had gone back to school part-time, pursuing her nursing license. The decision had come quietly, over dinner one evening. No dramatic declaration, just, "I think I want to try," followed by Marjorie's quiet nod. They were both learning how to live again. Inside, Thomas's belongings had been sorted. Some donated, some packed into labeled boxes in the attic, and a few things left exactly where they had always been: the worn hardcover books in the study, the Red Sox cap on the hook by the back door, the faded flannel blanket folded over the couch. She didn't keep them as relics. She kept them because they belonged. Because even in absence, Thomas was still here, and so was the weight of everything that had happened. Marjorie unfolded the letter again. The edges were soft now, worn from rereading. His words were etched in her mind, not just what he said, but what he meant. The apology that wasn't dramatic. The love that wasn't poetic. The trust that had been given, quietly and without condition, even as his world closed in. "I knew you'd protect what mattered." She had, but what now? That question lingered. More than she expected. For so long, every day had been defined by the fight, gathering evidence, attending hearings, shielding Kayla, holding herself upright against a system that had wanted her silent. Now, silence was all she had, and it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a choice. Later that week, Marjorie met with Adam Brewster at a cafe in Cambridge. The tech specialist who had helped bring Evan's crimes to light had reached out one last time, not about evidence, but an idea. "I've been thinking," he said, nursing a cup of bitter coffee. "This whole thing, it's not rare. What happened to your brother? Coercion, isolation, manipulation of assets, it's everywhere. Especially among older adults who are sick or dying." Marjorie nodded. "It's not new. It's just not recorded." "Exactly." He leaned forward. "But what if it could be? What if we built something, a system for families to protect loved ones during estate planning? A secure platform for video wills, caregiver logs, digital footprints. Not to replace the law, but to document what the law misses." She was quiet for a long moment. Then said, "You want to turn what happened to Thomas into a tool. I want to make it harder for people like Evan to exist in the dark." Marjorie thought about that. About all the people who had written to her after the news broke. The widows. The siblings. The exhausted caregivers who'd watched something similar happen to someone they loved, and had never been able to stop it. "Then we do it right," she said. "No tech gimmicks. It's about people. Dignity. Proof. And giving families something to hold on to when the system fails them." He smiled. "Exactly." They shook hands over the table. A new chapter. That evening, she sat on the porch again. The same cup. The same light, only this time, she brought the laptop. She began drafting the first version of what would become the welcome page of the new platform, a guide for families navigating the quiet war behind end-of-life planning. A digital record for when the voices go silent, and at the very top, she typed, "For Thomas. You weren't wrong. They just made it feel like you were." Kayla joined her not long after, barefoot, her hair damp from the shower. "I signed up for my first clinical rotation," she said. "Starts next month. Geriatric care." Marjorie looked up from the screen and smiled. "I think he'd like that," she said. "I think he'd be proud of both of us," Kayla replied. "Even if he wouldn't say it out loud." They laughed, gently, without ache, and sat together. As the light faded, injustice had knocked on their door. But so had truth. And in the end, they chose to answer for the person who no longer could, not just with a video, not just with evidence, but with something stronger than silence, with presence. The legal notice arrived on a Tuesday. A thin envelope, cream-colored and stamped with the insignia of a private law firm in Miami. Marjorie recognized the address before she opened it, the same office that had once represented Rourke Youth Futures. Now the epicenter of a widening federal investigation into fraudulent charities. Inside was a single page. Notice of intellectual property dispute regarding Hayes Rourke Biotech Research Notes. She read it 3 times before calling Renata. "They're trying to claim ownership over Thomas's personal work," she said, her voice steady but sharp. Renata sighed. "They're grasping. These are the unpublished files he was compiling on at-home diagnostics, right?" "Yes. His notebooks. His drafts. He was working on them until the very end. They weren't part of Apex Biotech or the startup Evan helped fund. They were his, completely separate." Kayla leaned into the doorway, brows furrowed. But what would they want with that now? Marjorie looked down at the letter again. A last grab. Or a smokescreen. If they can't win the money, they'll try to take the meaning. Over the next week, Renata dug deeper. She discovered that one of Evan's shell companies, VectorPath Solutions, had quietly applied for provisional patents using language eerily similar to Thomas's research journals. The applications had been filed 3 weeks after his death. They got their hands on his notes, Renata said. Maybe during that stretch when the house was under Evan's control. Before probate kicked in. Before you reclaimed it. Marjorie felt her stomach knot. She thought she had combed through everything, but there were gaps. Thomas had kept some things scattered, in email drafts, in folders, in the corners of bookshelves. And Evan had always been watching, lurking for opportunity. Now, with the estate restored, he couldn't touch the assets. But ideas weren't governed by the same walls. "This isn't just about theft," Renata continued. "If they push forward and get those patents approved, they could claim that you are in possession of stolen property, his journals, even though you're the rightful heir." Marjorie sat back in her chair. The exhaustion was creeping back. Not the kind that made you want to lie down, the kind that made you want to fight forever just to keep still. "They're trying to rewrite history," she said quietly. "Take what was his and rename it in their favor." Kayla found the answer, days later, in an old cardboard box in the attic. "Look at this," she said, placing a small black USB drive on the kitchen table. "I almost tossed it. It was inside one of those floppy disk sleeves. I think he hid it." Marjorie plugged it into her laptop. The drive contained a single folder titled Legacy Drafts, Final. Inside, timestamped research logs, scans of handwritten notes, metadata showing creation and access dates. One folder even contained audio memos Thomas had recorded. His voice clear, if tired, explaining the principles behind each prototype idea. "This is for Marjorie and Kayla. I don't know if I'll finish this. But I want you to know what I was working on. I want this to stay in the family. Not for money. Not for credit. Just because. I want to leave something behind that doesn't need fixing." Marjorie pressed her hands to her mouth. Kayla stared at the screen in silence. Renata reviewed the files the next day. "This is gold," she said. "Not just emotionally. Legally. We now have authorial intent. Provenance. Evidence that Thomas explicitly separated this work from anything tied to Evan or his companies." She filed a cease and desist order against VectorPath Solutions and submitted Thomas's recordings as legal evidence of authorship. Within a week, the patent applications were withdrawn under threat of perjury. Another win. A quieter one. But in some ways, more personal. Months later, Marjorie stood at a small community tech summit, hosted by a local university in Cambridge. The biotech department had invited her to speak, not about her brother's will, but about his work. She stepped up to the podium with Kayla in the front row, Adam nearby with a folder of diagrams, and several students, curious, bright-eyed, seated with notepads and laptops. She looked out over the room and began. "My brother, Thomas Hayes, was not a perfect man. But he was relentless. He believed in science with a kind of quiet devotion that never demanded credit. He worked on things not because they would bring him wealth, but because they could bring someone, maybe a nurse in a clinic far from here, a faster diagnosis. A better tool. A small edge in a losing fight. She paused. The auditorium was silent. He died believing that his voice might not matter. That someone else would take what he built and bury it, or rename it. But he left it behind anyway. And now, we get to share it, not to claim it, but to preserve it. There was light applause. Not the thunder of courtroom victory, something gentler. Warming. Honest. Afterward, a student approached her, a young woman in her final year of biomedical engineering. I want to help develop the diagnostics Thomas designed, she said. Not under my name. Under his. Marjorie smiled. Then it's working. That night, on the porch, she sat with Kayla as the crickets returned and the summer evening slipped into stillness. Do you think he'd want all this? Kayla asked. The attention? The patents? His name on things? I think, Marjorie said, he just didn't want to disappear. She looked out across the yard, where the porch light cast a faint glow over the grass, and now, she added, he won't. The camera was simple, a small digital recorder balanced on a stack of books in Thomas's old study. No lighting crew. No script. Just Marjorie, sitting in his chair, her cardigan draped around her shoulders, and the soft glow of late afternoon. Sunlight painting the walls behind her. She pressed record. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She simply looked into the lens, her eyes steady, unguarded. Then she began. If you're watching this, it means we made it through. Her voice was calm. There was no anger left, no grief that hadn't already been named. My brother, Thomas Hayes, spent the last year of his life trying to protect something he couldn't put into words. Not his assets. Not his work. Just a sense of who he was, who he still wanted to be, even as his body failed him and the people around him began to change. She glanced away for a second, then back. He couldn't say it out loud. That he was scared. That he felt pressured. That the people he trusted were no longer showing up with care, only with contracts. So he left me something else. She reached into the drawer of the desk, held up the small, worn flash drive, the same one she had carried into the courtroom what felt like a lifetime ago. This drive changed everything. But not just because of what was on it. Because it reminded me that sometimes, the truth sits quietly, waiting for someone to believe it deserves to be heard. This story was never about revenge. It was about preservation. Dignity. About reminding people that silence isn't consent. And that the absence of a voice doesn't mean absence of will. Her hand relaxed in her lap. Thomas didn't get to say goodbye. He didn't get to stand in court and explain what happened. But he left enough behind that I could do it. For him. And because of that, his legacy, not the money, not the company, but the person, was restored. She leaned forward, slightly. If you're facing something similar, if you're sitting on truth, wondering if anyone will believe you, press play. Speak. Stunt. Not for justice's sake. But for your own. She gave the smallest smile, not for the camera, but for herself. Goodbye, Thomas. You're safe now. And I finally got to say it. She reached out and stopped the recording. Later that evening, the video was uploaded to a modest website created by Kayla and Adam, part of a nonprofit initiative called Legacy Clear, a project designed to help families document, store, and protect the final wishes of their loved ones. No ads. No subscriptions. Just access and education. The video sat on the front page, beneath a simple heading, Stories That Protect. Proof that endures. Within the first week, it was viewed over 100,000 times. Life moved on in small ways. The porch was repainted. Kayla passed her licensing exam. The first of Thomas's diagnostic prototypes was licensed for public use under the name Hayes Reader, not through a corporation, but an academic medical partnership committed to public health, but none of. It felt like a victory lap. It felt like continuity. Like what happens after silence is broken, when sound becomes something more than noise. When it becomes memory. And then, meaning. One morning, Marjorie sat on the porch with Kayla beside her and a new letter in hand, this one not a threat or a filing, but a thank you card from a woman in Kansas. My mother was taken advantage of. I never knew how to fight it. Your story gave me the words. The courage. I'm trying now. Thank you. Kayla looked over her shoulder and smiled. You think it was worth it? She asked. Marjorie folded the card, tucked it into a little box of messages they'd started collecting, each one sent by someone who saw themselves in the fight. She looked out at the sunlight spilling across the grass, at the quiet road beyond. And finally said, every second. She closed her eyes, and somewhere, not in a drawer, not on a flash drive, not in a courtroom, her brother's voice lived on, not trapped in confession. But alive in conviction, not silenced, heard.